Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good following morning. This is AMA number 91. Today is June 23rd, 2022, Polish Father's Day, and my nephew Elijah's birthday. I'm with my co-host and loyal companion, wartime consigliere, Rabbi Avi Baumel.
Shalom, shalom from Krakow, Poland. Today is the 24th day of Sivan. Very exciting day in the Jewish calendar for what I don't know, but it's great to be here and we're back at it.
We're back at it. We have a lot to get to. We have a great guest tonight. Today, Professor Ben Paloff is with us. And we're going to talk to Ben and talk about stuff. Well, how are you, Avi?
I am well. Thank you for asking. It's a beautiful day here in Krakow, Poland, and I'm feeling good. Getting ready for the ride. That's exciting. I actually did a little training, so I went out and made sure that all the pieces still work, and I'll be out there. And on my ninth, is it my ninth or eighth ride? Whatever number it is, that's what I'll be here for.
Not sure exactly how we count those, since you have a interesting way of looking at the math with the rides, but yeah.
Basically all the rides, that's the amount that I've been there. So you could just count up all those rides from the start, the first one, right, which, mind you, you were not there for. Let's just make sure we understand who was there in the beginning and we move on.
Okay. So when you say basically means like like more or less. Is that
basically means just acknowledge that you missed out, and I'm the superior ride for the Livinger. So you did have that one ride that you did in the snow and you walked all those miles. All right, there's maybe we're equal.
It seems like we were. Yeah, we didn't see you when we all walked in the January 27th when we walked in the snow. 50 miles or so. I didn't see you there, Avi. Where were you that day?
I had a class. I was teaching Torah, so gotcha. Sometimes you have to.
Very good to be back. They've been very busy. No excuses, but have not been able to do the AMA, and I hope that we're back on. I think next week is not going to happen because of the bicycle ride and everything else. But after that, I'm hoping we'll be pretty good.
Okay, looking forward to it. We'll get some new guests and have new conversations. Should be great.
Absolutely. Since we've last spoken, I was in America. We brought the baby to America. I was in New York. I brought the baby to meet family, had the unveiling for my mom's, her matzeva. The baby met my family and friends, and I was in Baltimore. I was a scholar in residence at a synagogue in Baltimore. I gave 5 talks over the weekend, which was a lot. Thank you. And yeah.
You told me a fascinating story of what happened at the unveiling of your mother, which, gave me a little insight into the soul of Jonathan Ornstein. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. My great grandfather actually founded a place called the Brooklyn Jewish Center, which at one point had like 3,000 families members. He was the main guy behind it on Eastern Parkway, which that's its own thing, this important show. But it became, as Chabad grew and grew in Eastern Parkway, that is now the main sort of teaching seminary for Chabad. And as we were at the unveiling, a guy came up to me, a Chabad rabbi, and he saw the family name, which was Rothenberg. And he said, "Oh, are you related to Rothenberg?" And we said, "Yes, that's our family." And this guy was our great grandfather. And he said, "Oh my God, I learned there and this." And it turns out that our Chabad rabbi here in Krakow, Eliezer Gorari, also studied at the yeshiva that was founded by my great grandfather. So pretty cool.
It's in your bones, Jonathan.
In my bones.
Not just Jewish leadership, not just the culture, but the Yiddishkeit, the Chabad Hasidus. It hasn't left far from you.
All right. That's we all understand that that's very far away from true. But the trip was good. Unfortunately, we had a nice event on. We have our friend Carol, who's been an AMA guest. We had an amazing event on her. She has a incredible apartment. She moved downtown, and with this beautiful, beautiful rooftop. And we had, I don't know, 100 people or something, 80, 100, I forget how many people on the rooftop. Beautiful, beautiful views. Had a nice event. And then we flew back to Krakow. And upon landing, I tested positive for COVID. And I had COVID. The baby and Kasha a couple of days before they tested. Then the baby had COVID and was coughing, was horrible. And then Kasha and the baby was in the hospital with Kasha for a week. And she had pneumonia. It was very, very difficult. I say, today on Father's Day, you start to become aware of the highs and the lows. And even in almost 5 months, it's been, the highs of spending time with her. And then seeing your little tiny baby with the IV and coughing and crying, and it's terrible.
Wow.
But
really makes you really appreciate what you have, and that's what it's about. What else what happened? Oh, we had some little political revolution that took place, unfortunately, in Israel. Another dissolution of the Knesset, an experiment that lasted a year, and everyone thought it was terrible. It wouldn't last, and unfortunately, the world of politics, it's just another animal, and it just consumed anyone who has good ideas to try to make something work. And now back to the drawing board, back to the voting booths. And as well as in this, unfortunately, this perpetual cycle of knocking heads. So,
well, in my opinion, what's going on in all of this election after election, all this, it's BTB.
Back to business?
BTB. No, back to business could be better than BB. BTBB. Better than BB.
Well, yeah, in Israel, it's called the Raklo Bibi, group, which is fine. It's just that it happens to be, it's basically just, it's deadlocked, 59 seats this way, 55 seats this way. And people are calling for a change of the entire system because we've reached the point where it's almost an impasse. There's no way to reach, once again, we're trying to get a majority of 61, which is pathetic. You want a majority that 100 seats of that you feel like you're going in the right direction. And here it's going to revert back to a right wing and an ultra right wing government. And, and I'm a right wing guy, and I had so much hope that my guy, who was this right winger, worked together with the left winger and brought together different members of the Israeli spectrum. And but I was just drowned out by extremism and populism and just horrible voices that call for.
It seems like the nature of the division of Israeli society makes it complicated. You have the growing Haredi, you have the right-wing sort of national settlery Kippa Sruga, knitted kippah. You have the left. You have the Arabs, and it's just certain ones can connect with the others. Certain you can't combine this one with that one, and it's very hard to get any meaningful majority because A will be with B, but not if B is with C, and A can't be with D.
And it's only going in one direction demographically. So it's only going in the direction that our grandchildren are going to be. It's going to be a majority Haredi, or maybe our great grandchildren. But so Haredi, it's going to look different.
But the two growing populations are Haredi and Arab.
That'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Anyway, so it's a complicated thing.
So I'm actually going to Israel tomorrow. No, Saturday. I'm going to Israel for 48 hours. Now, I haven't been since February 2020. This is by far the longest. 2.5 years not being in Israel is crazy with COVID. But I'm going for Holocaust Survivor Day. And I will go to 2 events. I feel very lucky. The first, we're going to Beit Lochamei Ghettoot, the Ghetto Fighters Museum, on Sunday, where the certain ministers will be there. I think Nachman Shai will speak, and I will speak about and greet the survivors there, which will be a few hundred survivors there on Sunday. And then on Monday at Habima, at Israel's National Theater. I will be in attendance as you were last year, and there'll be some kind of event and a play, and there'll be, I think the now Lapid will be, or I think, yeah, who's now, I guess, is just about to be the prime minister, or is already the prime minister. I don't know exactly how that works.
Not yet.
Timing,
Not
because
yet.
not yet, but yeah, the soon to be prime minister and current foreign minister is due to speak there. So it's very exciting to be in two events with over 1,000 Holocaust survivors, celebrating this day that we came up with here in Krakow is pretty special.
Amazing. Amazing. Yeah, it was really an eye-opening experience at being in Habima last year and seeing all the survivors that we forget about because they're all living their own lives. And then when they come together, what you've created this day is a memorial of that, a living memorial, and hopefully it'll keep growing and spread.
I just found out that I have to, I'm going to be speaking in Hebrew, which, okay, but I don't know that I can just get up and wing it in Hebrew the way I can in English or the way I can in Polish. I might have to write something up with your little bit of assistance there, Abraham, or somebody's assistance.
We'll try our best, and then we'll send it to one of my kids probably to make fun of us. But yeah, for sure, we need to make it tight because
2 minutes. Yeah, maybe I write it in English and have it translated. Maybe.
Yeah, I would. The last thing I would want is you to read something in English, but in Hebrew, you need to make sure you don't just mess up somehow.
Exactly. Thank you for that. Yeah, I think my Polish is better than my Hebrew these days. In other words, for me to get up and make a speech would be easier for me in Polish than in Hebrew.
Right.
But I mean, 20 years in Poland makes sense.
You could schmooze. I mean, we always schmooze with people in Hebrew, but it's different when you have to.
Formal. It's a formal thing with members of the parliament and Knesset, with the cabinet ministers. So one other thing that was nice that I think you were almost here for. Oh, you were, but you were busy. We hosted a Nobel Prize winner here, Nobel Peace Prize winner. Very exciting. We hosted Jody Williams, which was nice to have. It was actually supposed to be a few Nobel Peace Prize winners, women, but one was delayed and the other one had some issues. So one Nobel Peace Prize winner came, who won the prize in 1997 for her work to try to get landmines banned. And it was excellent hosting her here, showing her what we're doing with Ukraine. We had her meet with Survivor and met with Ukrainian refugees, and she talked to some people that were helping. And we had a big event here with a lot of women activists. She was here with an organization called Azadi, which helps women refugees around the world through storytelling. And also there's a Nobel Women's Initiative, which is all these women Nobel Prize winners. So that they brought her here. So that was for us, of course, big honor to host a Nobel Peace Prize winner. There aren't that many of them.
Yeah, one of the influencers, or one of these women, was had a profound effect on one of our Ukrainian refugees here. She came over and she's hugging her and crying, and she, we don't really appreciate it here, but the effect that people have on what's happening in the average Ukrainian. And she was just awestruck by what one person, if you're a person and you have, I don't know, 100 million viewers, you have what to say, and you have some influence. So that's pretty cool.
Of course, that was you're talking about the previous visit of the influencers.
I don't think so, but I could be wrong. I don't know. I have to ask Nastya. I'm sure it was in the same day as the Nobel Prize laureate.
Anyway, so the Ukraine, we're that's still ongoing, still doing a lot of heavy lifting with helping, still numbers of, hundreds of people a day coming into our shop and taking what they need, and still housing 300-400 a day, and all of that is still going on. And luckily, the world is still being generous with us and supporting us and allowing that to happen. We're only able to do what people enable us to do with funding. So
it's amazing that it still goes on, and you see the faces, and they're scrounging. They need food, they need supplies, and they're not stopping. And you're very blessed to have people support the JCC, because it just keeps going, and it's a big Kiddush Hashem.
Amen. Amen. Let's bring in our guest. He has a very long bio. Let's see if I can get through some of it. Benjamin Paloff received a PhD in Slavic languages and literatures from Harvard University, where, by the way, he matriculated as an undergrad and I believe has a master's from there. He's been teaching at the University of Michigan since 2007. He's the author of Lost in Shadow of the Word, named 2018 Best Book in Literary Studies by the American Association of Teachers of Slavic and Eastern European Languages. He's 2 poetry collections. He wrote other stuff, speaks lots of languages, translated a bunch of other stuff. His research focuses on philosophical dilemmas, particularly in metaphysics and the ethics of representation in modern and Central and Eastern European literature, as well as on translation theory and practice. Avi, it's finally happened. We are on the call with somebody far smarter than the two of us.
Oh, come on. But tell us what you actually do. I mean, come on, you got to.
I don't even understand a word of what I just said. Welcome to the AMA.
Hey, I'll talk, but since that was can you hear me okay? Are we good? Yeah.
Loud and clear.
So it's probably the microphone's off, but my voice is like that. You probably hear me from my apartment. Yes. But to answer that first question, what do I do? I'm a rabbi, essentially. I'm a secular rabbi. I'm a secular rabbi. This is, you'd be surprised how much of a professor's life consists of counseling. And I remember this was a real conversation, not a conversation, but like a debate at one of our professional conferences a few years ago. There was this question kind of on the table: why is it that so many specialists in Dostoevsky are Jews, when you consider the fact that Dostoevsky himself was a raging anti-Semite? And the answer, I think, the consensus, it's either the consensus or what I think the consensus should have been, I can't remember, was that it's like a secular Talmud. Dostoevsky consists entirely of moral conundra where doing the right thing's not on the menu. So how do you then process those kinds of situational real life dilemmas? So it appeals. That's what I do.
When you say, that makes sense to me. Tell me this, when you say that a lot of the experts on Dostoevsky are Jewish, is that as opposed to if I went and I looked and saw a lot of the experts on Chekhov or something wouldn't be Jewish?
Well, I mean, if I'm being
a lot of the experts in all these different.
It's funny. There are lots of Jews in the world of Eastern European studies. There are a lot of Jews. That's not entirely coincidental, because a lot of Ashkenazim specifically left throughout the foundations of Eastern European studies in the early 20th century, all the way, and especially during the Soviet period. You have a lot of Russian Jews, Polish Jews who end up in the United States. They have the language skills, they have the philological skills. So that's not in itself surprising. But it is true, though, I think overall, that it's quite striking, even among, if you're doing Russian studies and you're into Dostoevsky and you're reading Russian language sources, a lot of those major specialists are also Jews.
Interesting.
So there's something about Dostoevsky and the way he sets up a situational dilemma that really appeals to the Jewish juridical mind. So that's, I think there's something to that. I definitely find that, there's certainly Jews who specialize in Tolstoy, but we won't talk about that.
I myself have used on many occasions the chapter on the Grand Inquisitor as that moral conundrum that it certainly affects Jewish philosophy and how we deal with free will and the like, for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
So that's what I do.
Let's back up a little bit, and before we get into even deeper into what you do, whether it's these days in Krakow or in your day job at the University of Michigan, let's go back a little bit to early days of Benjamin Paloff, Atlantic City. You're from Atlantic City. What nice Jewish boy is from Atlantic City?
Actually, they're like, have you seen A Serious Man, the Coen Brothers movie?
Of course.
So you know how the way they kind of represent this it's a real thing, this kind of like Minneapolis, St. Paul suburban shtetl of the 60s, wherever. That's basically what I grew up in, only the South Jersey version.
Yeah, but the timing of it. What's not, because you grew up in the 80s.
No, I know, but it was like in the 80s. So my dad grew up in Atlantic City too. There are lots of Jews in Atlantic City.
I'm not surprised about your dad growing up in Atlantic City. You growing up in Atlantic. I think that's the point. My point is that generally speaking, how many Jews were still in Atlantic City?
I mean, there's still a lot of Jews in Atlantic City. It does have that. I mean, even the one, because I grew up in a part of Atlantic City. Well, it's as often happens, it's a separate municipality there, but there are 4 separate municipalities on an island that's 7.5 miles long and a few blocks wide. Nobody wants to have, a kind of common wheel with anybody else. But in the 1 square mile,
sounds Jewish.
Yeah. The 1 square mile I grew up in, I don't know how many synagogues we had. We had multiple synagogues. It seemed, it was roughly, there was a kind of neighborhood that was half Jewish and the other half was a mix of mostly Irish and Italian Catholics. And we'd all go to school together, and then Tuesdays and Thursdays and Sundays, the Jews would all go to Hebrew school and the Catholics would all go to their after school religious program. They all coincided. And then the next day we would talk about what we did. But the answer to how it is that my father grew up in Atlantic City and then I did was just that my father, may he rest in peace, was not a terribly competent man. And he grew up in the 30s, like 30s into the early 40s. And he was an older guy, and for him, Atlantic City was boardwalk empire. It was exciting and colorful and carnivalesque and wonderful place to grow up in. And then he moved away, and when he had children late in life, he decided, I'm going to go back to where I grew up because it was such a great place to grow up in. He didn't do research.
He grew up in Atlantic City, which means that his parents moved to Atlantic City. Where's your family from? How did someone get to Atlantic City?
So it was an Ashkenazi family that and like a lot of families of that generation who came to the United States at the very, very beginning of the 20th century, fleeing pogroms and unfavorable conditions. They really erased the origins. I didn't know. My dad would say that our family was from Minsk, which is totally untrue. The thing is, I do this for a living, so I could find this stuff. It took me a few years, and archives get digitized and stuff like that. And I found my great grandfather's naturalization papers.
So not from Minsk, but he said you were from Minsk, because that was Minsk like, oh, I wish our family, was that the dream, to be from Minsk?
No, I think it was that my dad saw, an American Tail, that cartoon.
He just made it up.
He just made it that Minsk was synonymous with the old country.
It didn't matter where, Minsk represented all of Eastern Europe.
All of it. And then I found, and my father's father actually ran away from home in his teens, lied about his age, joined the Merchant Marine. It was during the First World War. He got torpedoed. The ship got torpedoed a couple times. Again, they didn't do their research. They would kind of jump into situations without really thinking about what they were getting into. But at least I actually have all of the ship manifests from my grandfather as a 16-year-old coming back into the US. And there it would say, first language Yiddish, race Hebrew, and birthplace Kiev, which also was not true, but it was closer, because when I look at the naturalization papers, I see that the family actually originated in the Cherkasy region, small towns in the Cherkasy region. So what is now, central Ukraine, and they emigrated to Philadelphia. They first settled in Philadelphia. That's where my father was born. There's more information than you asked how they got there. My father's grandfather is a Yiddish-speaking household.
I remember the question.
Yeah, you asked what the origin was. But my father's grandfather died during the 1918 flu pandemic. His grandmother remarried, and then this was the family my father grew up with, the Yiddish-speaking grandparents. They moved. They were cigar makers. They moved to Atlantic City because it was an easier, nicer place to live than Philadelphia, and they'd had bad experiences in Philadelphia.
You had the healthy air.
Well, that was the idea. Yeah, exactly. I mean, at the time, it was not a heavily settled place.
Live by the beach. What could be worse?
You lived, and part of the way my father was very close to his father, and the way they kind of made a living was buying and selling properties for cheap. They didn't make any money. There was no inherited wealth, but at least it was enough to kind of keep the family going.
They were real estate, buying and selling properties, and didn't make any money doing it.
They're not very good at it, but they did. But they were playing Monopoly, literally on a Monopoly. The Monopoly board is the properties of Atlantic City. I've lived on several of them.
Right, Ventnor and Connecticut, all of these. So
I lived in Marvin Gardens.
Clarence Dobbs,
something like that. He was the inventor of the game.
The inventor of Monopoly. Yeah. Something. Yeah.
Because that's what people were doing. That was Atlantic City. It was just people buying and selling empty plots of land.
I'm starting to understand a little bit better the fascinating mind that is Benjamin Paloff. So
let me know what you find, because
I'll let you know. You never hear the story of, somebody who a few decades ago or generations ago was in real estate, like, he was buying properties and selling properties. Usually the ending of that story is massive real estate empire.
No, there's a lot
of buying and selling properties, and there was essentially zero-sum game and no inherited wealth.
No, I grew up poor, actually. I grew up quite poor. And the thing is, my dad what he did have were stories of all these crazy adventures he had in the 60s. So this is before I was born. He and his father owned a jazz club for a decade through the 60s in Atlantic City. So my dad was a witness to the entire mid-century of American jazz. He bailed Miles Davis out of jail when he was speeding down from New York. I think he was there to see his connection, and but Miles Davis played my dad's club every summer. My dad would have all these, and the thing is, my dad's stories were never about the music. They're always kind of managerial stories. It was always like, Louis Armstrong and my father's father got along really well, and they both had dietary problems, so they'd sit in the back of the club and talk about food.
Louis Armstrong from Queens.
Really? I didn't actually know. Really?
Yeah, there's an elementary school, Louis Armstrong. Yeah, grew up in Queens. His house, Louis Armstrong's house, is a museum in Queens.
But he's from New Orleans, right? Wasn't Louis Armstrong from New Orleans, or did he just spend time there?
Queens.
Oh wow, I had no idea.
So I hope did you so you got the recipient of many good stories from your. Not everybody gets the Miles Davis stories.
No.
Better than inherited wealth.
Yeah, no, exactly. And my father was severely bipolar, so there would be these long stretches, sometimes weeks or months at a time, where he'd barely say a word, and then he'd get the other side of it, and it would be just stories. He just wouldn't stop talking, constant stories.
How many kids from Atlantic City High School went to Harvard undergrad?
I don't know. I remember there were two guys in the class ahead of me. They were the first ones in a long time. And then there was me, and there was one kid who showed up as I graduated.
What was that like? Because I don't know, Avi and I, I grew up around a lot of people, not that I had any money, but who had money and were this, and you grew up, I got to think that it was a little bit of a culture shock to get there in 1990.
It was 90. I started in 95.
So 1995, you get to Harvard from Atlantic City. What was that like, getting there in the beginning?
It's a little tough. That was tough.
Obviously, you're a smart guy. You knew you were a smart guy by then, because you must have had some decent amount of academic success at that point to get into Harvard undergrad. And like, what was it like what are you feeling there those first few days?
Well, because Harvard, I don't know how it is now. I don't have any reason to believe it's any different. Harvard really made so I applied, this is going to sound really weird. I applied to one college because I I'd read that if you could get in, that they kept the admissions and financial aid offices separate, and they do. And that if you could get in, they would figure out how afterwards they would figure out how you can go there. And we couldn't pay, so they basically paid for me. So I'm very grateful. It was also the first place I've ever lived, the first time in my life where I was happy, frankly. So that was great. But they also, they kind of trip over themselves to try to make the poor kids feel welcome. And when people do that, it makes you feel less welcome. It makes you feel like it has a reverse effect that's really quite troubling. So, they would trip over themselves, say 72% of our undergraduates are receiving some form of financial aid. And what I heard was 28% can't afford to pay this out of pocket. That's what I heard. And that's what I saw. So there was a lot of that. And you end up having to, today we're more sensitive to these things because we know, you don't look to someone who represents a particular demographic or a particular identity. You don't look to you don't say, well, what is the Jewish perspective? I don't represent the Jewish perspective. We're more sensitive than we used to be. But I would often get this like, oh, so I represent the poor kids. And I had a very close friend in school who actually said, and it still kind of still stings a little bit. She wanted to go, a bunch of friends were going to go out for pizza, and I just didn't have any money for pizza. So they said, we'll pay for you. And I was like, I especially didn't want that. And so I said no. And she just looked at me and she said, none of us really understands why you still have such a hard time having grown up poor. We're all fine with it.
Yeah.
Oh, you're fine with it.
You accept it. You did accept the financial aid and stuff to go to Harvard. It's kind of like the pizza.
No, it's not the pizza, because this is exactly why the highest form of tzedakah is bidirectionally anonymous.
Right.
Because the institution was providing for me, and I was contributing to the institution. And that was, so my relationship was with the community.
1 second, but by saying no to your friends who wanted to get you a slice of pizza, not buy you a car.
Yeah.
By the saying no aspect and you maintaining your pride, and they go and get pizza, they're going to feel, at least for a little while, feel bad about themselves that Ben couldn't come with them for pizza.
No.
Isn't it making them feel better by allowing them to get you the slice of pizza?
I don't see it as my role in life to go around and make people feel better about having more.
What do you see your role in life as?
To stay out of people's way as much as possible. I mean,
really. Right, but then you're not. I'm sorry, you're not a computer programmer sitting in your house. You are dealing with people, so you're not.
No, I know.
Way.
I know.
You're affecting young lives.
I try to give what I can, and maintain whatever level of dignity I can in doing that. But I don't, I've gone through many years of therapy, and one of the most important things I learned in therapy is I'm not responsible for how anybody else feels.
That's a good thing to accept. I have issues with that myself.
I had big issues with that.
I benefit. I'm not in therapy, but I benefit from everyone else's therapy.
I think society benefits from therapy. It's true.
Yeah, no, everyone says, "Oh, I learned this in therapy." I'm like, "Oh my God, that's great! I'm going to write that down," and I try to use it.
Yeah.
And did you go to the Harvard Hillel? What was the Jewish world like in Harvard for you?
So that's a really interesting question. So I've throughout my life, I've had difficulty with various Jewish communities. I had trouble with my own synagogue growing up. Was pretty well off. I grew up in a well-off neighborhood. I was sort of my family was kind of the charity case in the neighborhood. But more than anything else, I was also politically very much in favor of minority rights, and that included Palestinian rights. That didn't fly so well in my synagogue. and this strained my relationship with the synagogue. And so when I got to college, I did go to Hillel every so often, but I've always maintained a certain kind of personal distance. I started thinking of myself as like I'm a congregation of one, you know. I go sometimes. I'd also go to Chabad every so often. Not very often, because I didn't really grow up in that tradition, but my very closest friend in college, and still my very dear friend, he grew up in a more Orthodox tradition. We've been basically having the same argument for the last 20 some years. And so sometimes I'd go to Chabad with him, or we go to Hillel. I would actually say a very large number of my friends in college were Jewish. We would have debates that were heavily inflected with Jewish thought, but not necessarily religious debates. And that was the funny thing was, it was actually after I left college and after I left Harvard and moved to the Midwest that I realized that it was really the first time that in the United States I felt like an ethnic religious minority, because you grow up in a little Jewish community and half your friends are Jewish and the other half, frankly, were Catholic, and they kind of felt close enough, you know. And then and certainly, you know, Irish and Italian, they had a lot of the same immigrant experience from the same period of American immigration. And then I went to Harvard, and it was the same thing. It was honestly, I was surrounded by Jewish friends, and and then I moved to the Midwest, and that's where I really started to feel like, oh, the United States is not all shtetls.
Anyone look for your horns?
Yeah.
You know, not directly, but I definitely so my wife grew up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and which on some maps is in Canada. It's actually part of the United States, but it's very sparsely populated. Even though it's still in the state of Michigan, it's an 8-hour drive.
Tyson is from there.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, there was a rabbi in Poland who was from there.
Oh, really? It's a very remote place, and it has its own weird history. But when I would go up, it's not quite the same way now. But when we first started seeing each other, we've been together for a long time. But when I first started visiting her there, when I was 18, and people would stare.
Where'd you meet her?
I was noticeably racially different. What's that?
Where'd you meet her?
We met at nerd camp. When we were 17, we were, you know, some kids, nerdy kids, will go to these summer programs between. Yeah. So we went to one that was extremely competitive to get into. It was probably still the hardest application I've ever filled out. I spent weeks on it. It turns out that she threw it away. Her mother fished it out of the garbage and forced her to do the application the night before she got in. I got in, but we both, it was because it was a 6-week seminar, all on scholarship. So I could afford it. She could afford it. We ended. We were 17. We started seeing each other a couple of years later.
That's a nice story.
Yeah.
Ben, I have 2 questions for you.
It's her birthday, by the way. Happy birthday, Megan.
Happy birthday, Meg.
Yeah.
So I have 2 questions for you, and then I want to get to, of course, the culmination of all that we've talked about: parents, grandparents, Atlantic City, Harvard, Michigan, the culmination, which is, of course, now your time here at JCC Krakow.
Yes.
But before we get to that, I do have two questions. One,
the present is always the culmination of the past. Whatever that past is, this is it. This is what it comes down to.
Oh, fair enough. Good point. All right, wise ass. I usually only have to deal with Avi on this. No, one, why Slavic studies?
Oh, well,
yeah, I wanted to know that as well.
So there are a few things. I mean, I was planning on going into medicine, actually, and then for many years, and was really preparing for that. I switched shortly before I started college. My main love for studying has always been contemporary American poetry. And in the early 90s, if you were into contemporary American poetry, it was basically a one leap to get to Eastern European poetry, because my favorite American poets, the ones I really started to get into as a teenager, they were translating or writing essays about or otherwise promoting these poets from Russian or Czech or Polish, Eastern European poets because of the Cold War interest, etc.
So poetry was your path to Slavic studies.
That was a big part of it. That was probably the main part of it. Another part of it, frankly, was like standing. I would spend hours and hours, sometimes hours in a day, standing on the beach in Atlantic City and staring east into the Atlantic and just imagining what is the furthest, what's the opposite of this? What's on the other side of this?
Yeah.
And the other side of the Iron Curtain was the most, I mean, it was inaccessible when I was growing up. So it really had this, it seemed almost unimaginably other than. So that was part of the attraction too. And then and here one more thing is, so I went to a poetry reading in New York City. There's a weird story because New York was quite a hike. It was about 2.5 hours. We didn't have a car for most of my childhood, but I went to New York City to go to a poetry reading because I really wanted to see Mark Strand read. Wonderful Canadian American poet. But it was a double bill. It was Mark Strand and this Russian poet I'd heard of but never read before, a Jewish Russian poet, Joseph Brodsky.
Oh, wow.
And I went to see Strand. Strand was great, but I really left having seen Brodsky. And that was just a few months before I started college. So that, and the fate has, it's funny. So my office at the University of Michigan used to be Brodsky's office.
Not a coincidence.
I occupied his office.
Not a coincidence.
Not entirely, because my office was a few doors down, and when that one became vacant, I was like, no. I seized it.
So Benjamin, how can you compare and contrast the campus, because you've spent most of your adult life on two college campuses, two very privileged liberal college campuses, one more privileged than the other, clearly, but what's the difference between, what's the atmosphere? And obviously the timing is different when you're there at 18 and when you're now, 40, it's a difference, but what
40, I remember being 40. That was great.
Hey, you're younger. I'm the oldest one on the call.
That's right.
What's the difference? What's the vibe on campus? What's the difference in Michigan and Harvard?
That's a really interesting question. I don't know that I could, because I spent the last 15 years at Michigan. While I go back to Harvard for academic things, it's not, I don't really, that doesn't necessarily give you a sense of what the student body is like.
All right.
I would say that Michigan is actually, in many ways, I would say that Michigan feels more privileged than Harvard did. Because Michigan is an extremely moneyed environment. The university is, and that is not as felt at a place like Harvard. In part because, for example, at Harvard, something like 98% of the undergraduate body lives on campus, in campus housing. It's a residential college model, so there's a big incentive for doing that, and that does foster. I mean, that's not nonsense. That does foster genuine community, and you're living with the same people for several years at a time, in a stretch, and Michigan doesn't. Michigan has that in very small amounts.
Right. The housing is the housing. You're not living in these, can't rent these outrageous, apartments.
Yeah, you're not living in some luxury apartment block, a couple, blocks away from campus.
I guess also you don't have. I mean, you don't have fraternities, so
there were no fraternities at Harvard. There are these things called final clubs, which are quite ugly, but they don't. They're not officially sanctioned or recognized by the university.
Not is such a driver of the social situation as fraternities are at a Big Ten school. Exactly.
That's exactly. And the other thing is, no one. So this is one of the things I never particularly liked about Michigan is the degree to which the athletic programs become a part of the branding of the university that becomes tribal. Yeah. That's not likely to happen at a place like Harvard. Look at our athletic program there. I mean, it's not like
if you look past the major sports.
Yes,
true, right?
Harvard's athletic program is exceptional.
It is exceptional, but that's because you're talking about people like this. But they're looking to, it's a population of people who wish to be exceptional for the sake of being exceptional. Right, they're not looking to get famous. You're not going to get famous because you wrote crew.
Right.
But it takes a huge amount of dedication. Whereas people, in Michigan basketball, Michigan football, certainly.
Right.
And then you have this enormous stadiums, the biggest football stadium in the world. It has the capacity it's talking about Michigan, of course, the
100,000,
capacity
2,000.
110, 108 or 110, something like that. It's equivalent to the population of Ann Arbor. And most of the people in that stadium in a game are not from Ann Arbor.
Yeah.
But they're all wearing these uniforms, basically the same colors, and they're again, oftentimes dripping with privilege, because it's very expensive to go to these football games. I've never actually been to one.
You've never been to one game on principle?
No,
But sociologically,
because I have better things to spend my money on. They're expensive. I don't get a discount. Faculty of Michigan don't get discounts for stuff, mostly.
your children wouldn't get a discount?
I don't think so. Oh, wait, as like a tuition discount? No,
Really?
nothing. No.
They don't
They'd get in-state tuition because we live in town.
In-state
But,
tuition. Fair enough. All right. In-state tuition. Interesting.
What do you teach there on these days?
What's your course last semester? What classes did you teach?
So last semester, I don't know, what was I teaching? No, last semester I was teaching a course on Central European cinema, specifically on race, gender, and basically race and gender in Central European cinema. I begin in 1932 and end in the present. I teach this course fairly regularly. I have to say I did not design this. Herbert Eagle is a wonderful film specialist in our department, designed the course, but I did my own version of it. And it's this, I can say about Michigan, one of the great things about Michigan, given the size of it, is that if you want to, you teach a course on Central European cinema, I get 80, 100 people in that class.
That was my next question.
Oh, yeah.
100 people for Central European 1930s cinema.
Yeah, when I teach Polish literature, if I'm teaching some 20th century Polish literature, I can get 30 students in a class. So that's something that there's always, Michigan's the kind of place we have. Polish is an undergraduate major. It's also a PhD major.
You have a very strong, not only the Slavic studies program there, but all these different, and I can never, you'll forgive me, I can never, and I'm aware of it, not only through you, but I've not been in touch with you really over the years as much as with Genevieve.
Genevieve, yeah, sure.
Who's a good friend of mine, and previous guest on the AMA. So, I have all these departments, and I came to speak there in conferences that you guys host for this, and I was there in Michnik and this one, and
yeah,
it's a very strong, also of course, the Michigan, the Detroit area is a large Polish population, one of the larger ones in the US. So that's natural.
Yeah, no, it's one of the things that's really cool for Central European studies that makes Michigan an especially good place to do Central European studies is that, I'm not the Polish person. I mean, I'm not Polish at all, but I'm not the person, the specialist in Poland. I am a specialist in Poland there. I'm basically the literature and culture person. But if you want to study Polish history, we have another person for that. Brian Porter-Zuch is our Polish specialist in history. Genevieve is a sociologist.
Right.
And so on and so forth. We have multiple specialists in different areas of Polish studies. Polish Jewish studies is a huge kind of crossover area between our Polish Studies Center and our Judaic Studies Center, where I'm also affiliated, and Genevieve is also affiliated. So, like, for example, last time I saw you, Jonathan, in Ann Arbor was at that Polish Jewish Studies conference that was so vibrant before the pandemic, and I hope we get to do another one of those in the next couple of years.
Absolutely. And Benjamin, now you're in Krakow.
Now I'm back in Krakow. I've spent a lot of my adult life here.
When's the last time you were here?
5 years ago.
5 years.
Normally I'm back before I would be back maybe once or twice a year, but then I was going to other sites, 4 years ago and 3 years ago, and then I was going nowhere for 2 years, as the rest of us.
You contacted me, and we've been in touch, over the years, a little bit, not terribly.
Yeah.
A little more difficult because obviously you reject all social media, which is the way the rest of us are staying in touch. Fair enough. But you reached out to me. Oh, not only let me know that you're coming and see you, but that you were interested in volunteering here.
Yeah.
Which was wonderful, and volunteering not for a couple of days, but here for about a month or so.
A little more than a month. Yeah.
More than a month. Can you talk a little bit about, I guess the motivation is, I see what's happening in Ukraine. I see what you guys are doing. I want to help. I don't know if the motivation is coming from a different thing, but what has your experience been like? What's that been like so far for you? What is your, you're still here and doing it. You've gotten more involved. We asked you to essentially run the volunteer program because we thought you'd be great at it. And obviously we're, pretty swamped. What's your, can you talk a little bit about your experience? You've been in, must have been a few weeks already, 3 weeks, a month or so.
Yeah, it's been about 3 weeks now.
Yeah. Talk about your experience.
I should probably take a day off at some point. I haven't done that yet, but because the need is endless. There's no end point to this until the brutality ends. And then even then, it's not going to end because somebody's got to rebuild this country and take care of these kids who are going to be living with the scars of this for the rest of their lives. But it's been for me, the thing that I like to do, that I like to be involved in, is direct action, small scale, personal, like this. I see what my effort is and I see what the result is. The way I've been thinking about this is, because mostly what the work is involved breaking down wholesale packaging to smaller quantities that we can distribute to more people. I think we're reaching something like 600 people a day. Is that right?
Yeah.
Is that number right?
Yeah, 500, 600, yeah.
Yeah, there are days when the line really is snaking down the block. And am I doing some big fundraising? No, I'm not really. That's not my thing. I'm not really particularly good at that. But I do know what it's like to not have a cup of coffee in the morning. So I'm just making sure somebody's got their cup of coffee. I know what it's like if you have a baby. I have kids. I know what it's like if suddenly you realize you're out of diapers. We can't keep diapers on the shelf. We can't keep baby food on the shelf. Almost everyone who's coming to us is a mother with a small child or small children. And a few seniors, but mostly it's the mothers and children. And so it feels very direct. I don't want to say satisfying because that's not something I'm really thinking about. It's just, it feels direct. It feels like I'm doing what I consider to be my duty as a human being. And it's, it's, as soon as February 24th happened, my job, because I direct the Center for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies at the University of Michigan, my job took on a whole other set of layers, right? Organizing or trying to organize resources from the university to support displaced scholars, graduate students, putting together fellowships. But these are the sorts of things, they're totally important, absolutely, but they're going to help a family at a time, a family for a month-long stint, or one scholar for a few weeks. Absolutely important to do, but I knew I was going to be here anyway, because I haven't been able to come here or do a research trip for the last couple of years. I had a research program. I have funding from the university. I'm doing research while I'm here, but I'm here, and I got a couple hands. I got a 14-year-old with 2 more, and a wife with 2 more, and a son with 2 more, and so we just wanted to make them available, and that's it.
Has anything surprised you by what you're seeing, by your reaction to what you're seeing?
I was a couple things. It took us some getting used to the first few days, because this the kind of direct action is not for everybody. It's not necessarily for me. I don't know. I just when I was a kid, for a brief period, for about 6 weeks, 2 months. When I was 14, we were homeless. And I did not realize how much of those old feelings of precarity would be flooding back the first couple days I walked in and saw these little kids. Because the mothers are bringing, they can't leave the kids somewhere. They're bringing the kids in, strollers, constant. It's so that was surprising to me. It was what was really, honestly, one of the big research agenda I have here has to do with translation and nationalism. And as you know, nationalism has become nationalism and neo-fascism have really seeped into a lot of Central European governments, including Poland's. And so I have a research agenda, but a lot more of it has been inflected by what I'm seeing at the JCC, because I came here, I'm an adult speaker, an adult learner of Russian, Polish, Yiddish, and some other languages. In 25 years of coming to Poland, I've had maybe 2 conversations in Russian in 25 years. I speak Russian this trip as much as I speak Polish, more or less equal.
Yeah.
That is a completely new experience. And during the course of my, the few hours I'm putting into the JCC every day, I'm often switching back and forth throughout the day very quickly, which is both exhausting but really great practice linguistically. But it is it is the opposite of the kind of cultural engineering that neo-fascist governments wish to see. Because you go into the food pantry that we're running, and half the volunteers there are speaking Russian. They're there, they themselves are refugees serving other refugees. Half of them are speaking Ukrainian. They're speaking Russian and Ukrainian back and forth. I don't speak Ukrainian, so I speak Russian to someone who speaks Ukrainian back, and kind of interpolating between Russian and Polish, I get most of what the conversation is. So it is, on any given day in the JCC, throughout the day, it's Russian, Polish, English, Ukrainian. People who were speaking Spanish last week. Someone was speaking Mandarin the other day. That is,
yesterday we had a Yiddish conversation.
What's that?
Yesterday we had a Yiddish conversation.
Yesterday you and I, yes, geschmusen auf Yiddish in the JCC. Das alles sehr gut though.
I reminded him of Muntik, of blessed memory. Sounds like you're having a fascinating trip. And,
it's definitely been fascinating. It's been
fun to be able to see you here in the building and spend this time with you. It's been great. I've really enjoyed that. I mean, besides the obvious of thank you for the incredible support that you're doing here, and you downplay it, but you've been
drops in the ocean.
Hey, it's all about the ocean. The ocean is only made of drops.
Exactly.
Ben, Jonathan and I, and Jonathan much more, have had probably hundreds of people have asked to volunteer. And we usually say, no, we say, how good is your Russian? And that ends the conversation. And what a breath of fresh air that you come in and, you're a professor of this and you're able to converse with everyone and really bring it to another level on the volunteering level. It's a godsend.
I have a couple more very quick things as we start to draw to a close, Ben. One is I usually have a couple questions that I ask. The first one is usually, are you on Team Latka or Team Hamantash? I ask every AMA guest, but I will not have to ask, since you have taken on the mantle. You will defend the honor of the Hamantash next week, Saturday, July 2nd, 2 p.m., JCC Krakow.
Yeah, so this is, we've discovered a certain, the old quip is 2 Jews in a room get 3 opinions. But even with me as one, I have at least 2 opinions, because you mentioned this to me this morning, and I immediately just said, oh, latkes. And then you told me that I have to actually, that what you're asking me to do is argue for Hamantaschen. And that's been running. The gears have been running. I'm starting to convince myself that my initial prejudice for the latkes was misplaced. So nice. I'm ready for Hamantaschen.
Argue against latka prejudice.
Many people, myself included, can argue on behalf of Latka. Very few. takes a certain type of person to argue on behalf of the Hamantash. Ben, you're also doing the bicycle ride with us.
I'm looking forward to the bicycle ride so much. I mean, I have
our favorite thing of the year, Avi. Our favorite thing that we do all year.
Favorite thing.
For every year.
Nothing
our favorite
beats
thing
it.
that we do.
and
Favorite
my
day of the
son
year.
Zeke, who rides, he's 12, but he's his grandfather, my wife's husband, or sorry, my wife's father is an inveterate, like serious cyclist. He got my son into it, his grandson into it.
Oh, is he doing it?
My son rides 30 miles a day
Wait, is
easy.
Zeke's doing it?
Zeke's doing it
Great.
the whole time, the whole way, 60, and
He'll
he's
do
going to
it.
be complaining the least.
He can win. Although
Yeah.
it's not a race.
It's not really a
Wow,
race.
some serious Paloff. Excellent. And my final question to you:
Mhm.
What are your 3 favorite films of all time?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I really love movies. Very high up there on the list has to be Pulp Fiction,
Me
which is one
too.
of the very best written films.
It's in my top 3.
Yeah. You know what? I'm gonna skip anything that sounds effete, or I'm gonna skip foreign films. I love, The Mirror is up there, but I'm just English language films. It makes it easier.
As you will.
And all based on reading and the performances is got to be Pulp Fiction, The Big Lebowski, and Casablanca.
Solid 3. Solid 3.
Can't argue with those numbers.
Very solid 3. Benjamin, thank you, my friend. I will see you
Pleasure.
in the not too distant future. I'm guessing we might see each other tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Well, you see you tomorrow morning, and then we'll be at Shabbat dinner tomorrow night.
Excellent.
Thank you for this. It's been great. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you, guys.
Pleasure,
Take
Ben.
care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.